Guys, good Tuesday afternoon. I'm Jerry Miller, and welcome to the I Love CVille Show. Thank you kindly for joining us. We are live in Charlottesville, the Commonwealth, the country, and the world, right here on the I Love CVille Network. I absolutely enjoy connecting with you guys through the I Love CVille Network and through this platform where we utilize long-form content to educate, enlighten, entertain, elucidate. That'll work, right? I was looking for a little alliteration right there. A lot we're going to cover on today's show. We got a city council budget that's going to be approved in a week. We got the meals tax increasing 0.5% in the city. You go and pay or support restaurants in the city of Charlottesville, more money out of your pocket that does not go to the restaurant you're supporting. It goes to the government instead. There's a space in the downtown mall that has tremendous potential that's for lease. We'll highlight that space. There's a business on High Street that's for sale that has potential. There is a business in the city of Charlottesville, a piece of property, excuse me, in the city of Charlottesville that is one of the most talked about pieces of property and real estate that is now under study and heading toward a contract. We'll highlight Jamie Dimon's letter to shareholders. He's the CEO of JP Morgan Chase. A letter much talked about yesterday that talks about the confluence of three data points or three macro circumstances: Ukraine-Russian war, inflation, and the economy in this country recovering post-pandemic, and how these three macro trends are colliding at the same time and shaping a potential recession on the horizon. We encourage everyone that's watching the program to check out yesterday's show, which you can find on ilovecville.com, where we interviewed Alex Bruner of the Charlottesville Police Foundation. We spent an hour talking with him, discussing the precarious plight of a police officer on the Charlottesville Police Department, a precarious plight. It should be talked about some more. ilovecville.com for that interview. That was one of the best we've ever done. We have on today's program a number of businesses that will very soon hit the market from a for sale standpoint. I'm getting hit left and right from business owners in Charlottesville, now Moore County, considering listing their business. We talked about it a couple of weeks ago that we were going to utilize this network, this reach, this influence, and this platform to champion founders, partners, owners, CEOs, limited partners, mom and pops, as they look to exit and make some money on their hard work and sweat equity of grinding for years, decades, a generation plus in their business. And now, post-pandemic, folks are tired, exhausted, uncertain, and feeling vulnerable. And I'll be straightforward, you will see a flood of new business listings hitting the market and discussed and analyzed and spotlighted on this network by me. So much we're going to cover on today's program. It is jam-packed with information. Today's show presented by Skooma Boutique Dispensary, the best dispensaries on the Charlottesville downtown mall. It's Skooma Boutique Dispensary. David and his beautiful wife are opening a second location on Elliewood Avenue. Skooma Boutique Dispensary next to Rapture on the downtown mall and on Elliewood Avenue, servicing locals, students, and tourists alike. Skooma Boutique Dispensary. The budget is going to be the lead of the show. An approval date is April 12th for the budget council looking to approve in the city of Charlottesville. Meals tax is going to go up 0.5 point, 0.5%. The councilors are looking, working, they're grinding, they're heading toward a way to fund reconfiguration, and at least in abbreviated fashion or form. Fortunately, council realizes the threading of the needle that must happen with funding a school and not gentrifying the community. So this real estate tax rate is likely not going to increase the 8, 9, 10 cents that we feared. A rate increase that motivated us at this company and platform to implore and respectfully demand council to check down, to slow their roll, and to realize the impact of an increased real estate tax rate in a time of 2022 when assessments are 12% up on average across the city and inflation is trending north of 8%, fuel, gas, groceries, and other daily expenses higher than they've ever been. So those topics today on the show. I'm going to highlight Kim's Market on Cherry Avenue and what has become almost a little bidding war for the property. I'm going to highlight the Sunoco on High Street, a gas station that is currently for sale, $450,000. The building, the Sunoco on High, is 440 square feet. Very intriguing piece of property we will discuss today on the show. I want to lead with the budget. It has an approval date of April 12th. City Council. It's budget season, and for the last 60 days we've been talking about the X's and O's of financing this city. The budget has monopolized almost every aspect of local government, has, like any budget season, been the focal point. But we are now in the bottom of the 8th inning, heading into the top of the 9th, with a finished budget a week from today. We can expect, when the budget is completed, the meals tax to increase 0.5%. From my standpoint, that's another hit on the mom and pop restaurant owners in our city. Many folks that go dining, drinking in the city, they look at the number at the bottom of the bill. They don't see the itemized portion of the bill and how taxes take up such a large percentage of the overall meal costs. They just see the bottom bill and say, good night, dinner for two. My wife and I, my husband and I, was $94 for the two of us. We each had a cocktail, one appetizer, and we each had an entree, and we're $94 in. Raising the meals tax in the city, straightforward fashion and speaking, impacts the perception of affordability for locally owned restaurants in Charlottesville. Anything that raises the total cost of a bill in the city of Charlottesville, the perception, and it's not right, but perception is reality in so many forms, especially in the era of social media and digital marketing and mobile phones. The perception is it's the restaurant that's asking for more. The reality is meals tax going up 0.5% is out of the hands of the restaurateur and is in fact implemented by local government. Now, council will say, Increasing the meals tax from 6% to 6.5% keeps Charlottesville in line with most Virginia cities. Council will say raising the meals tax from 6% to 6.5% will give the municipality, the jurisdiction we call Charlottesville, an extra $1,200,000 to allocate toward jurisdictional needs. All those statements are true. When your family goes out, when you're out on a date, or you're enjoying a meal as a single person or as an individual, and you see the bill increase, you don't think, oh, this bill is going to help fund housing affordability or school reconfiguration. You do this, wow, that looks expensive. You also are causing the gentrification of the restaurant experience. Going out to eat and getting a good meal at a local restaurant should not only be for wealthy people. An increase of any kind at a time when gas and inflation are pounding Charlottesvillians, Central Virginians, and Americans is unfortunate, unneeded, and lacking a grasp on the reality of Main Street. But that's what's happening. We'll follow the budget closely. When the budget's put to bed, hopefully on Tuesday, a week from today, my next hope is council then shifts its attention to the city manager position. The current city manager is a mercenary city manager, a consultant, a hired gun, whose 6-month contract expires in June. It's now April 5th. The likelihood of the mercenary Robert Bob Group's contract being renewed for an additional period of time is highly likely. And as I've tried to highlight on today's program, if council doesn't make a decision and move quickly with a new city manager, it's going to be up to us as voters and residents and taxpayers to say, well, guys, you should wait on hiring a new city manager until after the next election. We are now 3/11. We're now less than a year and a half away from 3 council spots being replaced. We are now less than 9 months away. January of next year is when we will start seeing folks campaigning for open seats on council, and there's going to be 3 of them, a majority. Payne, Snook, and McGill seats are all up for grabs. Folks will start campaigning for those 3 seats in January. If a decision has not been made on city manager soon, you will start seeing campaigners for council say, I will help determine the next city manager as part of their election platform. We're getting close to a lame duck city manager position. I want to highlight some businesses that are on the market. Judah, you have some photos of these businesses. Let's first go with the Sunoco on High Street. Convenience store, small one. I mean, it's 440 square feet. You're looking at an asking price that I think is relatively reasonable of $450,000. You're looking at new pumps and new tanks for this gas station. You're looking at an area that has a total population, demographic statistics, of 72,000 people within 3 miles of the location, 90,000 people within 5 miles. Let us know when the Sunoco photos are up. They're up? Are you rotating them through? You're a good man. Thank you, Judah. Keep them rotating. Look at the screen, everyone. Look at the screen. Look at the screen. Look at the screen. I drive by this business daily going to and from my house in eastern Albemarle County. The potential is significant. Getting in and out can be a little touch and go, but it's near downtown, it's close to Pantops, it's right off 250. High Street is a corridor or a cut through from Pantops, eastern Albemarle, and the epicenter of employment, UVA in downtown. Within 5 miles of this location, a total population of 90,381 people. Within 3 miles, a total population of 72,672. And within 1 mile, a total population of 11,383. $450,000 asking price, one with potential, especially as the Cosner family, the family that owns the body shop on the corner of 250 and High Street. Mr. Cosner has a stranglehold on High Street. His daughter Kim, open-minded to moving and shaking with deals on that road. I've called High Street one of the most underperforming corridors in the city of Charlottesville. Sidewalks lacking, traffic significant. Many of the business along that corridor, they are in the B2B space and not the B2C space. This is an appealing listing. Another one I find very appealing is Kim's Market. Good friend of the program, Chris Kabash, has been working tooth and nail to try to sell Kim's Market. Asking price of $350,000. The potential for Kim's Market is not a grocery store. The potential for Kim's Market is density. 72 units of density to be in fact. We hear that Kim's Market, we'll call it seriously understudy in a multiple offer scenario. Kim's Market, Cherry Avenue, right on the cusp of 5th and Cherry, I would say is one of the top 5 most full of potential parcels of real estate in the city of Charlottesville. Number 1 is undoubtedly Alan Kajin and Ludwig Kutner's X Park. That is number 1. It's not even close, and it's still on the market. They're asking like $4 million plus per acre. Kim's Market is in the top 5, if not the top 3. 72 units of density potential, and it is very, 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 very close to John Hancock. Kim's Market, owned by a divorcee, a female. She's owned it for an extended period of time. Home to a subcontracting firm, a builder, remodeler that has a headquarters in the Shenandoah Valley, one of the prime contractors of choice for the University of Virginia. They're utilizing Kim's Market as their Charlottesville city home to keep labor and fuel and wear and tear in vehicles in check instead of driving to and from their Shenandoah Valley headquarters and their job sites at the University of Virginia, instead they have a Charlottesville headquarters, which is Kim's Market. Multiple potential buyers. The deal fell out of contract earlier this year. And at $3.5 million, 1.35 acres, a half a pitching wedge away from the downtown mall. Okay, depending on how you hit the pitching wedge. Maybe we'll call it a gentle 9-iron from the downtown mall, Kim's Market, as the crow flies. Is, I would say, the second or third most appealing piece of property that's undeveloped in the city that's 10.2 square miles. One is Ix Park. Can someone name a piece of property in the city of Charlottesville currently that has more developmental appeal than Kim's Market on Cherry? Ix is one. I'm going to say Kim's Market is two in the city of Charlottesville. Can someone think of one that's more appealing from underperforming and potential standpoint? Anyone? Put it in the feed. I cannot. I follow this closely. This is the job. I cannot think of one. But I'm open-minded to your ideas. John, JB, John Blair, can you think of one besides Kim's Market and Ix Park more appealing from a density and development standpoint? In the city. I cannot think, I've been racking my brain about this. $3.5 million. We'll keep you posted on this deal as it heads to the closing table. Another piece of property that intrigued me quite a bit, and Lisa Costello, we'll get to your comments on the meals tax. I thought you said, Lisa Costello, your comments extremely well. We'll get to your comments. Another deal that very much appealed to me, or piece of property that appeals to me, now this one's for rent, downtown mall, right next to 1,000 Villages, right next to Hamilton's Restaurant, right next to Miller's on the downtown mall. Can you put that on screen? It's on screen now? You're doing a hell of a job, Judah. Hell of a job. We're connecting here chemistry-wise. I love when this happens. Look at the screen. Look at the screen. Look at the screen. Everyone look at the screen. 2,700 square feet. Your base monthly rent is $3,498 a month. That works out to be about $15 and change price per square foot. Historic downtown mall. Mixed-use retail pad. The landlord is offering a tenant improvement allowance. Super tall ceilings, retail or office space, storage room in the rear, and an additional office space upstairs. This property next to 10,000 Villages, next to Miller's, next to Hamilton's is appealing. Good size. The $15 a price a square foot is not bad. Think there's probably a little room for negotiation there, and you could probably creep your rent right around $3K with some landlord tenant improvement allowance also included in the deal. You're going to probably lock in at a 3 or 5 year term with an escalator each year, doable, tangible, and realistic. 107 West Main Street. I'm taking a second stroll of this space tomorrow. I'll relay more what I see. Before we get to Alex Urpí, I want to emphasize this. In the next 30 to 45 days, you are going to see more businesses for sale. Business and more businesses with their real estate for sale than maybe since the 08, 09, 2010 recession. you got a substantial chunk of the Charlottesville and Albemarle County business community that is meeting the following criteria. A, they're aging and getting older. B, they're exhausted from a COVID pandemic that's lasted 2 years. C, they have floating debt associated with prime. And having floating debt in this ecosystem is a very concerning proposition. You do not want floating debt right now. D, I am going to cut to the chase, and Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, straight up said this yesterday. Jamie Dimon, last year, 2021, was bullish for the American economy and its direction. Yesterday, in a letter to shareholders, Dimon said you have three forces that will shape the world over the next several decades. And those three forces are the U.S. economy rebounding from a COVID pandemic, high inflation that will usher in an era of rising rates, and a Russia invasion of Ukraine and the resulting humanitarian crisis and collateral damage associated with this war. He said their confluence may dramatically increase the risk ahead. Jamie Dimon wrote this letter to shareholders, a 180 from a mood and sentiment standpoint when compared to a similar letter to shareholders last year. So here you have Main Street, and I'm talking Main Street anywhere, not just Main Street in Charlottesville, but Main Street anywhere. You have mom and pop businesses that have exhaustion and just downright gut punches coming out of a pandemic. 2 years has been brutal. You got floating debt left and right. Debt that was accumulated and lines of credit that were created and established just to get folks out of the pandemic. Floating debt associated with prime, and you don't want floating debt right now. You got a war, and you got mainstream media talking about recessions, and now arguably the most impactful and influencing stakeholder in finance, Jamie Dimon, straight up writing to his shareholders at JP Morgan Chase, this is what I'm worried about. In the next 30 to 45 days, you will see a flood of Charlottesville and Albemarle County businesses hit the market from a for sale standpoint. Not just businesses themselves, but the business and the real estate associated with them. I'm seeing it. I'm feeling it. I'm being reached out and contacted by them. You got some fire sales on the horizon. Georgia Gilmer, that's a damn good one. I'll get to your comment. Scott Bandy, I'll get to your comment. Alex Urpí, moments away. I asked you guys this question. LinkedIn, I asked you this question. Twitter, I asked you this question. YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, 15 Facebook pages, 15 Twitter accounts, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok. I asked you this question. Can you name a piece of property in the city of Charlottesville that has more density and developmental potential than Kim's Market on Cherry Avenue? I said number one undoubtedly was Ix Park. And no one's arguing that. Georgia Gilmer, the Queen of G, that's a legit one. She says the City Yard. The City Yard is a damn good one, Georgia Gilmer. The City Yard is in the Star Hill neighborhood. The City Yard is a hidden gem that is essentially warehouse space for public works in the city of Charlottesville. The City Yard, Queen of G, Georgia Gilmer, is fantastic. A large, central, underused, under government control piece of property that is home for gas, water, wastewater, stormwater, facility management infrastructure. That is a damn good one, Georgia Gilmer. I'm going to put that in the top 5. I will still stay committed that Kim's Market is better from a potential or a developmental density standpoint than the City Yard, but the City Yard undoubtedly has to be in the top 5, Georgia Gilmer. Props and kudos to you. Another one that's coming in from the feed, you guys are so smart. You guys are so smart. Grayson, I love when you watch the program. He said, how about Harry Wright's Junkyard? Behind Beer Run. Have you guys ever driven by Beer Run and looked at the junkyard across from Beer Run? Brian Yeagle, that's another good one that came in. I'll get to yours, Brian Yeagle. The junkyard across from Beer Run is owned by the Wright family, and it is massive. It is freaking massive. In a city that's 10.2 square miles, any space of green has tremendous value. And the viewers and listeners are sharp and intelligent, and they've highlighted Wright's Junkyard behind Beer Run. What area is that? Is that Hogwaller? Is Wright's Junkyard Hogwaller, viewers and listeners?
Close.
What else would you call that? James Watson. That's a damn good one, James Watson. God, I love this freaking show so much. All right, we got a top 5 shaping up. See if you can find out for me if Wright's Junkyard, is Wright's Junkyard Hogwaller? Can someone let me know your thoughts that knows that space inside and out? You're checking that out, J-Dubs? I think that's Hogwaller, isn't it? I think that's Hogwaller. Okay, so here, James Watson also suggested Alan Kajine's property, also owned by the late, great Gabe Silverman's estate. The parking lot on West Main, next to where Wild Wing Cafe was, and the Amtrak station. That is a gold mine, too. So, all right, you guys are helping shape a top 5 list. Top 5 pieces of property in the city of Charlottesville with density potential that are underperforming and underdeveloped. That's the list. Top 5 properties in the city of Charlottesville that are underperforming. Brian Yeagle says the Dewberry Hotel in the downtown mall. That's another good one. So number 1, I think we're all in agreement, Ix Park. Ix Park, I'm saying number 1. J-Dubs, James Watson says Woolen Mills neighborhood. Wright's is Woolen Mills neighborhood. James Watson, thank you, my friend. Woolen Mills. He says Wright's may span across Woolen and Hogwaller. James Watson, the king of orbit, watching the program. All right, James Watson's making us smarter right now. Ix Park, here's the ranking 1 to 5. Top 5 most underperforming but full of potential pieces of property, land with density potential in a city that has so little freaking inventory that real estate prices are legitimately appreciating 30+% over a 2-year period of time. You are not getting, dude, year over year, real estate in the city of Charlottesville is appreciating, on average, assessments 13%. Some areas 20+%. Some areas in the city of Charlottesville have appreciated over 40% in value in 2 years. 40% in value in 2 years. Please find me an investment vehicle that you are getting 40+% appreciation in a 2-year period of time. Ix Park, number 1. Number 2, I'm going to go with James Watson's West Main Street parking lot. King of Orbit. I'm putting this is going to turn into a story on I Love CVille either later today or tomorrow. West Main Street parking lot. Number 3, I'm going to go with Wright's Junkyard. Who said that? Grayson? Grayson, was that you? Wright's Junkyard. Wright's Junkyard in Hogwaller and Woolen Mills. Number 4. What was the 4 one that someone came up with? I'm going to go Kim's Market in the 4 slot. Kim's Market and the 4 slot on Cherry Avenue. It's understudy. It's nearing the finish line with a John Hancock. Kim's Market and the 4 slot. What was the other one? Dewberry in the 5 slot? Or do we call the Staples? The Staples Vinegar Hill. The travesty that was destroying an African American community for the sake of urban renewal. What, in the 50s? I'm going to say the Dewberry Hotel in the 5 slot, and then James Watson's Staples Vinegar Hill in the 6 slot. You know, that's that Staples parking lot. It's freaking massive, dude. It is never full. That asphalt parking lot in front of Gerhardt's and Staples, Vinegar Hill, it is never full. Seriously. And does anyone believe that the future of that shopping center is a flagship business called Staples Office Supplies? Do you believe? I don't believe that. Do you believe that? I don't believe that. I got one word: Amazon. Eroding that space of business. There's your top 6 most underperforming, full of potential from a density and creating new housing for the city of Charlottesville, 10.2 square miles. Number 1, X Park, Ludwig Kutner, Alan Kajin. Number 2, West Main Street parking lot, Alan Kajin, owner of that one. Number 3, Wright's Junkyard. That one's owned by the Wright family. 4, Kim's Market, owned by a divorcee, a female that's been trying to sell this piece of property for some time. John Hancock coming soon. 5 slot, Dewberry Hotel, owned by the extorting emperor of empty lots, a former rambling rat quarterback who grew up in Waynesboro. And 6, Vinegar Hill. That's a hell of a list, dude. That's a hell of a list right there. I'm texting that to myself. That's going to be the highlight story on I Love CVille for all to see and read. Lisa Costello, and then Alex Urpí. This show is blowing up right now. Lisa Costello has this. Some want to justify the meals tax by claiming the upper income people pay for the meals tax. That's not necessarily true. Single moms exhausted after pulling a double shift, exhausted raising kids, ride through drive-thrus at fast foods for their kids, and they also pay the meals tax. It's not only upper-end dine-in restaurants that get the meals tax. Please highlight this for me. Lisa Costello, props and kudos to you. Raising the meals tax is the gentrification of the dining and restaurant experience. You make restaurants more expensive, then you start making them for deep-pocketed people, and bing, bam, boom, before you know that, wealthy people are the ones that get to enjoy dinners and lunches and breakfasts out. That ain't cool in my book. All right, let's get to the Antonio Banderas of finance, who's in the green room right now. I believe he's getting a shoulder massage. And having some champagne. There he is. Oh, you got a fresh haircut.
I did indeed.
You're looking sharp. And you got more tan. Were you outside?
Not particularly.
You're looking sharp.
Just as whenever there's more light,
Me too.
the day I get more tan.
Yeah, we can't help it.
It's the Latino.
It's the
part.
Latino in us. Yeah. I spent an afternoon outside at the beach or the or playing some kind of racket sport, and I get very, very dark, my friend. First, good afternoon, Alex.
Good afternoon. How you doing, Jerry?
I'm very well. The show is en fuego ahora, chico.
Already.
Let's
Nice.
start, and dude, you're going to continue it. Let's start with Jamie Dimon's letter to shareholders. Something we've been talking about. A confluence, he calls it, of 3 forces that are likely to shape the world over the next several decades. A U.S. economy rebounding from the COVID pandemic, high inflation that will usher in an era of rising rates, and Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the resulting humanitarian crisis and supply chain collateral damage. Your thoughts on the Jamie Dimon, who I would say is the most influential individual in finance.
Probably, especially on Wall Street. When you talk big Wall Street, the legacy firms, Jamie Dimon is the one because he's JP Morgan.
Who else would be as influential as him?
As him? Maybe sometimes the legacy firms sometimes faint. I think he's at BlackRock.
Okay. Maybe Steven Schwartzman at Blackstone.
I was thinking BlackRock.
Okay.
Also,
You wouldn't say Schwartzman?
Schwartzman at Blackstone could be. BlackRock is also, they control so many mutual funds because they own iShares.
Yeah. You got Brian Moynihan at Bank of America, who's super influential. But when Jamie Dimon speaks or writes, it turns into news.
Everybody listens.
Your thoughts on this letter?
It's a very long. What interests me about the letter is that it's a very, very long-term perspective on that these things will influence us for that long. I mean, it's one thing to say that inflation is no longer transitory. We may be looking at more than 1, 2, 3 years of inflation. It's another thing to say that we've completely changed the paradigm and we're now looking at a high inflationary environment for 20 years. Particularly, and then a rising rate environment, particularly when I do still believe that there are very powerful forces pushing rates down, particularly in the United States. In other words, rates are rising now. Yes, the Federal Reserve has, obviously they took that 25 basis point hike to combat inflation, but there's no denying that in terms of the debt of the United States, there is a ceiling on how far the Federal Reserve will ever let rates go, at least to the extent that it's within their control. I mean, we know that they cannot control long-term rates completely, right? But in terms of what the Federal Reserve is able to impact, they just, even though it's not in their mandate, you sit there and say the United States government and the Treasury cannot afford to see a higher interest rate environment for 20 years. I mean, the country simply cannot afford that kind of environment. So it's interesting to see. I'm not sure what he's looking at, saying why he thinks that this would be a longer term picture, particularly if you're looking at a supply chain issue, because the supply chain issue to me would be resolved faster, and then not faster as in fast. I mean, faster than 20 years, maybe. I mean, it may take 1, 2 plus years, but faster than your typical inflation, stagflation, endless spiral. Your inflation spiral like the 70s, okay, that can last a long time because you've got either too much money in the system, you have people's expectation of inflation pushing prices up. The fact that he's connecting it to supply chain, I'm sitting there saying we will have bigger problems than inflation if we are sitting there with supply chain issues in 10 years. Like, inflation will be the least of our problems. Like, shortages will be our problems if we're looking at supply chain issues for a decade. So it's just interesting that he's extrapolating a very long-term picture with this information. Because 20 years is what, in economics terms, you would call the very long term.
Okay, I'm with you. It might be in the trash, on top of the trash. It's an article I cut out from Barron's magazine that I want to read to Alex. Barron's, I get Barron's, and this jumped out to me that I wanted to read to Alex Urpí. Finish your thought right over there.
No, that was my thought. Essentially, in other words, I don't think he's wrong in the short term or even in the intermediate term. It's just I sit there and look at very long term. I see technology, of course, always puts downward pressure on prices. And in the very long term, I'm just not seeing, unless we're looking at very serious shortage, supply chain issues, I'm just not seeing where he's seeing that our current inflation is going to last 20 years.
I want to, Alex Urpi, CEO, Emergent Financial Services, co-star Today y Mañana. The show is dynamite. Thursdays at 10:15 a.m. Today y Mañana, presented by Emergent Financial Services, and just a fantastic group of brands and businesses that make the community better. I am a Barron subscriber. When I read it, when I get it, I like each issue, I pour through it.
Blueprint.
I love it. Barron's, Wall Street Journal, Forbes not so much anymore. The Chartist is another one I read constantly. And Barron's has got an article that I tore out that I was going to read on Friday's edition of Real Talk when Quentin Beckham and Sasha Farmer are here, and also for you. And the headline is, "Here's why housing might hold up to rising interest rates." Mm-hmm. And the author's perspective, Lisa Belafus is the author. She discusses the potential of rates climbing. What if rates climb 6, 7, 7.5% on a 30-year fixed?
Okay.
8%
So
on a 30-year
significant.
fixed.
That's a very significant.
Significant. With Jay Powell trying to keep inflation in check, and with housing in such shortage, and no labor force to build new housing, and so much red tape that new housing is not a realistic scenario. Mm-hmm. The scenario posed in the article was potentially 6, 7, 8% rates on a 30-year.
I mean, to put that in perspective, 8 rate hikes at 25 basis points, as they have been doing, is 4%.
So
actually, no, is that, yeah.
We're at 4.79.
No, other way
on
around.
a 30 fix.
We're up 4. So what I'm saying is 8 rate hikes. So if the Federal Reserve from now raises rates 8 more times at 0.25 basis points per clip, that's 2%.
Yeah, so that would take us to 6 3/4.
That would take us to 6
almost
3/4.
7.
So you have to also add on top of that either more rate hikes or a widening spread. The spread between
50 basis points instead of 25.
50 basis points, or like I had said, for some reason the spread between mortgages and Treasury widens.
Walk me through a scenario of 6, 7% or higher. Let's be realistic. We're not going to say it's like getting into the teens or in double digits. Mm-hmm. But the first property I bought was 6 1/8 on a 30 fixed. Walk me through the scenario of an American economy on a 7% 30-year fixed interest rate for a piece of property.
That's interest rate there is very significant because as Xavier and I always talk about, when you have the price of homes going up. So let's say the price of the home you're purchasing goes up. That price, particularly for, let's just say you have a 30-year mortgage, that increased price of your home is spread out over 30 years. So in other words, if I was looking at purchasing a home for $400,000, now it's $500,000. That extra $100,000 is spread out, extra cost is spread out over 30 years. When the interest rate, when the mortgage rate goes up, that increased payment is applied to every single mortgage payment for the next 30 years. So it's a much more significant, an increase in mortgage rates in terms of what you pay over the life of the mortgage is going to be much more significant for the home buyer than just a flat out increase in the price of the home, because that mortgage rate is impacting every single payment for the next 30 years. That's the interest rate.
He's exactly right. So good explanation there. We'll take it a step further. The rising rates undoubtedly mean less disposable income. Mm-hmm. Less income means less money for Main Street, less money for additional spending, less money for investing. Mm-hmm. The 2 years during the pandemic, markets were frothy. We had free money, stimulus money, and stimulus money went into, in some ways, yes, paying bills, yes, making ends meet, into speculation in the market. Mm-hmm. As rates rise, and they're undoubtedly rising, and her premise is if they rise to a 7, 6 high 6s, a 7 and 8 on a 30 fixed, that where we would see the hit would be less froth in the market, less retail speculation, more opportunity for institutional investing, and potentially a shrinking of the economy, not only on Main Street, but on Wall Street as well. You buy that.
That's an interesting one. I mean, Main Street, you can see the direct correlation. Wall Street, more difficult to say because of the fact that there is so much, and I think it's what you pointed to, there is so much institutional investing on Wall Street that you can kind of see the upward impetus in Wall Street, even if you took out the froth of the individual retail investor. Because as long as the retail individuals, we all participate in the market. Most people participate in the market not through an individual retail account that they're using with their disposable income, but through the automatic deductions that come out of their salaries that go into their 401ks, their simple IRAs, their SEP IRAs. In other words, that is where the average person, most of their participation in Wall Street is going to be, right? That might still be the case, right? And those investments are not made individually by people, they're made by institutions. Institutions that put those funds, those 401k plans, put those funds into very large mutual funds, which basically buy the indices. They buy, if the S&P 500 has these 500 stocks in it, every time the average person's, their paycheck comes, that part of their paycheck comes out, goes into their 401k, guess what gets bought? Those 500 stocks.
So you don't buy her premise.
So I'm not sure I buy the Wall Street premise that Wall Street would necessarily, I mean, we've talked about the divide before.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it necessarily follows that Wall Street will go down. I think you can see the economic chain whereby less disposable income hurts Main Street, because that's where the economic activity, if I have less disposable income, I go out less. I spend my discretionary spending less. And discretionary spending meaning things I don't need. Because what do you need, right? Your food, rent, gas. Pretty much. Food, rent / mortgage, gas. Discretionary is everything else. That's sort of what drives it. I mean, going out to eat, discretionary. For the most part. One of your viewers made the great point. For some people, that's non-discretionary. Lisa made that great point, right? But for most people, most restaurants, you're probably getting your business from discretionary. In other words, people don't necessarily have to go out to eat, but they want to. So restaurants are discretionary. You think about shopping on the mall, discretionary. You're not doing that with your needs.
Yeah.
You think about your stationery stores, your little mom and pop shops that are selling some goods, your antique stores, your thrift shops, discretionary. It's pretty much all discretionary spending. So as that is reduced, because you have less, because more is going to your mortgage, you're going to spend less. You can see the economic daisy chain there getting to a lower Main Street, like a harder hit Main Street. My argument would be I don't necessarily see all those correlations coming into play with Wall Street. It's possible, but it's also possible that Wall Street does exactly what it did in 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, which is you're sitting there saying the economy is barely moving and Wall Street is skyrocketing.
It was a bull market.
It was a bull market.
Yeah,
and you look
one of the greatest bull markets in the history of markets.
Exactly. And you sat there and said from 2009 to 2015, there was really not that much economic growth. Certainly, I mean, you saw the PE ratios just balloon. And we were sitting there seeing stable price, so PE ratios, price earnings, the price of the stock divided by the earnings of the company. So a high PE ratio means this stock is trading way higher than the actual amount of money that's they're making as a company. We saw them hit levels we had never seen before.
Yeah,
that you
many
would
of the
have
tech
said
ones.
Especially the tech, but a lot of them that you would have said was unsustainable.
Right. I mean,
And they have proven to be sustainable because the divide is just there.
Danny O'Day, this is for our topic, DOD, King of DOD, Danny O'Day. Between Ukraine and Western Russia, and we've talked about this, the area of land being destroyed right now. We're looking at a destruction of 30% of the global grain production, something with ripple effects on the supply chain for years, if not longer.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. I mean, again, I think you can definitely see the 5 to 10 year picture of supply chain. My point is that if that lingers beyond
we got
10
bigger
years,
issues.
we've got bigger problems than inflation. In other words, you're talking shortages because you're still seeing population growth in numerous places, particularly Africa, which needs a lot of that grain. And so we have like much more serious issues than even inflation if that persists beyond 5 to 10 years.
Here's an interesting one. This via Twitter DM. Jerry, ask your guests if he had 100 grand, where would he invest it today?
Ooh, that's an excellent question. To be honest, I'm not sure I would invest it differently than I currently have my own portfolio, in the sense of you still want a combination, and this is just my philosophy, right? My philosophy is very hard to know the crystal ball. You still want a combination of stocks, I'd say US, emerging market, small cap, large cap. You want some tech, you want some, particularly now, I think you also want some consumer staples and utility. I mean, they're not consumer staples, which is the things you need. They're not the most attractive from a story, a narrative standpoint. It's like, oh gee, I'm so excited I invested in Johnson & Johnson today and Coca-Cola. But you do want some kind of dividend paying, large cap stocks. And also we've been looking a lot at Emergent floating rate bonds. Because when you have this kind of environment, a floating rate bond it's almost like you talked earlier about a lot of the debt that sometimes small companies will have. It floats, and as interest rates go up.
Tied to prime.
As the prime rate goes up, that goes up. So floating rate bonds
Worst kind of debt, well, second worst kind of debt. Worst kind of debt is, third worst kind of debt. Worst kind of debt is loan shark debt.
Loan shark, I was going to say.
Third most, or second worst kind of debt, probably credit card debt.
Credit card.
Third worst kind of debt, it's probably floating rate debt. Floating debt.
Floating rate debt is a bet.
It's a gamble.
It's a gamble.
Yeah.
If you had floating rate debt from 2000
you were in a good position
till
because
now,
prime went down.
Exactly.
Yeah.
For a while, if you had floating rate debt, things were looking dandy for you.
Yeah.
Now, if it goes up, of course, you're going to be on the wrong side of that trade. As an investor, though, to buy floating rate debt now, we're finding it a little more attractive.
Walk us through that.
Because what you do is you buy bonds that, as the interest rate goes up, they will be the coupon on the bond, which the interest rate you get paid, ticks up following whatever benchmark it's there. Sometimes it's prime, sometimes it's LIBOR. So you basically, as the benchmark rates go up, then there are certain times of the year when your floating rate bond now is paying you more interest. So you get to participate, you benefit in two ways. A, you get more cash flow if rates go up. B, you're less subject to the value of the bond going down. Because remember that the price of bonds always goes opposite of the interest rate. So interest rates go up and you're holding a bond, the price of your bond goes down. Why? Because your bond is now paying a lower interest rate than someone could go buy in the market. Floating rate bonds have less of that issue because they're going to catch up. Their coupon will also go up. Therefore, you're less susceptible to the bonds you hold going down in price. So as an investor, it's kind of the opposite. In other words, if now is a bad time to have floating rate debt, that means conversely, it's a better time to be a floating rate investor, to be the person collecting that floating rate debt, because you will get paid more in a rising interest rate environment.
Alex, Urpí, dropping knowledge here. Thoughts on businesses hitting the market in the next quarter or two, with some of the circumstances I outlined.
Here locally?
Yeah. First, where do you want to go with that?
It is interesting because I agree with your point. I was listening when I was in the green room to your point about how I think this is a confluence of events. Namely, you have owners who may already be seeing retirement in the future, saying
they're already aging.
Is this now the best time to get out? Because you never want to wait to the last minute. In other words, if you're 70 and I know you need to retire and you need to sell your business to fund your retirement, I'm lowballing you if I'm a buyer. I'm sitting there saying you need to sell this business to live off. I'm giving you a lowball. If you're still far away from retirement, if it's still some years off and you're looking at the environment saying I really don't want to have to go through some of what I see ahead, staffing shortages, having to raise prices, so forth, maybe now is the time to basically call it quits and get out, particularly if you do have floating rate debt. I mean, if you're sitting there and you're having a floating rate or a line of credit and you're saying it may be more expensive to do business, get out now.
What's your trusted guy in this community? I mean, even every time I spend time with you, I feel smarter. And I know the viewers and listeners do. The year and 2 months or 3 months that we've spent a day a week, oftentimes 2 days a week, has just been a benefit for us and for the community. And sincerely, genuinely, sincerely mean that.
Appreciate that.
I swear, I sincerely mean that. Walk through what you would say to a, I mean, I think I sympathize even most with like the two-man shops or like the mom and pop, the husband, wife, the family business that is exhausted from COVID, cannot find any labor.
Exactly.
Their cost of
themselves.
their cost of goods has never been higher. I mean, inflation is killing them. Gas affects everything. Debt tied to prime, which is a lot of people, is now going in the wrong way. Instead of downward, it's going up. That floating
And
debt.
particularly if all their savings are in the company.
All their savings are tied to the
Then
company.
their upside with the market or their upside as a receiver of higher rates is not there.
Right. What do you walk us through the council?
No, it basically is a matter for a lot of, when you're approaching this, the two things you look at first, at least from my perspective, from our financial planning perspective, is you're going to look at debt, liabilities, and you're going to look at assets. And which is the same as if you're really valuing like a household is not that dissimilar from valuing a company. You're going to look at what's the debt, what's the assets, particularly if you do not have assets separate from your company. And this happens to a lot of people. It's why we advise people to start retirement accounts when they have their own business, because you do not want all your retirement money to be tied up in the actual company. You want some of it. But a lot of times that's not the case. Particularly if you're a really small business owner, you may be sitting and say, my retirement is the company. That is my pool of assets. Right, because yes, your home is an asset, but typically if you don't want to sell it,
You got to live somewhere.
you got to live somewhere, right? And if you don't want to sell your home, or you don't want to downsize, you can't downsize. That's usually your last piece to move. In other words, you try not to have to count that as, oh yeah, this is my assets that I'm going to live off in retirement, right? So it's usually your company. You then look at the debt, and not even the debt you hold, but like how that debt will be impacted by the future environment. And depending how far off that retirement is, that's when we counsel people to say, you know what, sometimes you need to think of this earlier rather than later, because as I said, if you have no other assets and you wait too long, you are going to get lowballed. In other words, no one is going to pay you 100 cents on the dollar for your company if they know
You have to sell it.
that you have to sell it to survive from age 75 to 90.
You've lost your
Like,
leverage.
you've lost your leverage. So particularly, again, if you have retirement assets, if you've managed to move some of that equity from your company to another source,
Then you
over
can
time,
say no to a potential
you can
buyer.
say no.
And you have leverage.
Exactly. You have leverage, so it's a different picture. We can work with them to sort of figure out, all right, are you still enjoying this? Do you start to move, take less and less work, so forth. But if that is your retirement assets, it's all in the company, then you really do need to really have an early picture on this and say, that's why I'm not blaming some of these people that are looking at this, because they may be seeing and saying,
Ahead of the game.
They're ahead of the game.
Yeah.
Now is the time to do this. Particularly also, I do not envy, we're in a fortunate position because we're white collar, percent of assets under management. So we don't have a price, like a sticker that says this is $100, now it is $125.
You don't have cost of goods.
There's no cost of goods,
Yeah.
right?
Your cost of goods is, you have
My
your
labor,
sweat equity.
yeah,
Your-
sweat equity.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. You work 60 hours a week.
Exactly. That's basically how it works,
Yeah.
right? You work as much as you need to get everything done, and that
Right.
is your cost of goods.
Same
here, exactly, right? You're not going to be faced
Not
with
selling
doing a
widgets, as you
sticker
like to
shop.
say.
Exactly. We're not selling widgets. But if you are selling widgets, I do not envy having to basically explain to your customers, look, yes, this was $1.25 yesterday, and it is now $1.50, $2 because...
And I'm making less money.
And I'm making less money because my cost went up. And yes, I think most clients, people are reasonable. I think they'll understand. But that's not an easy conversation to have. I do not envy having to have that conversation. And you can see it. You can see, because sometimes you go into a restaurant, even though, even me, who sits there and I know what goes into it, I can get the sticker shock sometimes. I'm like, is that $25? Doesn't seem worth $25. Even though I intuitively know. I've studied it. I know what's going into it and why it costs that way. But you still get the sticker shock. And sometimes it does cause you to say, maybe I won't eat out as much this week. right? Not because you have anything against the restaurant owner, but because you have your own budget now also to look at. So I do not envy the people that have to sell widgets and who are looking at it saying, you know what, better to think about this now. Selling, converting a illiquid asset, because the company is illiquid. Not easy to sell. You know, if you have a little store downtown and say, hey, would you like to buy 5% of my store? That's not easy. And the sale of a company itself is not easy. Right, so I do not envy them say, let me turn this illiquid asset into liquid assets, knowing that I can then use them in retirement.
Dropping knowledge today, Alex Urpí. I will say this in straightforward fashion. I think the next 60 to 180 days, hell, I'll make this even longer. I think 2022 and into 2023, call it a year, is going to be one of the largest opportunities to purchase businesses that Charlottesville has seen in some time.
It's certainly, I've never seen this many.
I'm being
for sale.
bombarded.
Your
Alex.
website is now turning into like, you might as well turn into a broker.
It's being bombarded, and it's everything that we've talked about on the show here. Another question that I wanted to pick your brain with: how do you value a business? And this came up with the Brown's Fried Chicken. Mm-hmm. Now that one had a lot of tangible assets, the real estate itself. Mm-hmm. On Avon, you know Brown's?
Oh, exactly. I know where it is.
Great spot.
Yep.
How do you value a business when the owners don't own the real estate and they work pretty much every single shift and the customers come to see them?
That is a tough one. I mean, usually what happens in very closely held businesses like that is the sale involves the current people there, the key people staying on. In other words,
transition.
Yeah. The buyer will say, all right, here's your revenues. Because let's face it, you only buy a business, right, from a buying person. You only buy a business if you think you can make it more efficient.
Sure.
Right? Otherwise, you're paying.
Blue Ridge Country Store is a perfect one.
Exactly.
You do Blue Ridge Country Store. Did you see the post we did about Blue Ridge Country Store? It's sold?
Mm-hmm. I saw that it sold, yep.
Yeah, Blue Ridge Country Store for sale. In fact, I think the listing broker is watching right now. Stu, are you watching right now? I believe I see you on the on our heat map. So Blue Ridge Country Store, Patty and Dan. Shoot, we got 2.5 minutes here. Patty and Dan worked every single shift, pretty much every shift. Mm-hmm. They were only open Monday through Friday, not at nights or not at weekends. We both talked about how there was an opportunity to work at nights and weekends. Mm-hmm. But the revenue associated with Blue Ridge Country Store was 100% associated with Patty and Dan working the shift and being there. The asking price, and you would think it sold pretty darn close to ask because it went under, May 1 is when the new owners take over. The asking price was $195. March 7th, Stu was the listing agent, $195K. Okay? So talk to me that. So they don't own the real estate. They work every shift.
And they're not staying on.
They're not staying on.
So what you're looking at is the new owners are
staying on for 10 days.
10 days, okay, it's nothing.
Yeah.
The new owners are essentially looking at that, but what is the 195, right? The 195K is a discounted cash flow, meaning it's some number of years worth of revenue that has been discounted to one chunk number today. So the only reason you pay the chunk number today is because you think that you will be able to get higher cash flows over the period of time that you are looking at than the current owners are. Otherwise it's a wash, right? Otherwise you sit there and say, I'm paying $195,000 for 5 years worth of revenue, but what, I have to wait 5 years to break even? In other words, the new ownership is sitting there saying, we think given the location, given what's in the store, given maybe their confidence in their own personality to be able to sell, we can make this more efficient and make more revenue out of it than is currently being generated. That's the only reason to make that sale.
Yeah. You're going to work nights, you're going to work weekends, you're going to have other earning windows where you can pay off the debt fast and get the profitability.
Exactly. Otherwise it's
just put the money in the market.
Just put the money in the market. I mean, save yourself
pay off some
trouble.
credit card debt.
Pay off. I mean, literally just put it in. Even if you made a few percentage points on it, your own labor is not being involved.
Exactly. Exactly. Guys, get ready, get ready, get ready. Your dad, Xavier, think Japan. Their rates have been zero for decades. You're assuming that the 10-year also rises. A 7% mortgage rate for a $400,000 loan is another $1,000 per month.
So it's huge.
Substantial. It's substantial. Dude, it's like literally this community is on the cusp, And we talk about this all on the show all the time, but I've never seen it like this, where it's literally on the cusp of being as homogenous and as wealthy as I've ever seen before.
That's what will happen, right? That's always the price, unfortunately, when the cost of living is very high, right? People who cannot afford that cost move out to the margins, and those who can afford it
come in
and pay what needs to be paid, pay what they can afford to pay.
Alex Urpí, in 25 seconds. He is the CEO of Emergent Financial Services. He's an all-around amazing person. He is the Antonio Banderas of finance. I freaking love Tuesdays with this man. I love Tuesdays with this man. 25 seconds if you could. Judah, we're 1 minute behind our 1:45 call. Today y mañana, Thursdays at 10:15, please.
Today y mañana, I'm going to make it really fast. We're going to have on Sam Kessler. He's the owner of Philosopher's Stone Pizza. Ooh. Great local business. It's going to be fun to have him on. As well as we're going to do a little Archie. We're going to have both Dr. Caroline Wara, the artistic director, and Dr. Leanne Pettit-Clement, General Director of Charlottesville Opera, are going to join us.
Charlottesville Opera
and Philosopher's Stone Pizza.
I'm gonna be late for the call. Where's Philosopher's Stone Pizza?
I think Nick would know this better than I think it's Crozet area, but I'm not 100% sure.
Is that right? CMO Nicholas Urpi?
CMO Nicholas Urpi will know. I'm not 100% sure. See, my job is, as the co-host, is to show up and interview the guests and niche the brains behind the operation.
You do it. You guys have a great team. You guys have a very good team. Thursdays, 10:15 a.m. Today y mañana. Thursdays, 10:15 a.m. Today y mañana. Emergent Financial Services. I'll say it loud. I'll say it proud. Emergent Financial Services, with a family-owned business that picks up the phone when you call and you talk to the decision makers.
Absolutely.
Very different than others in the space. And that's what I've heard legitimately from clients of the Urpis. They talk to you.
Mm-hmm. Oh, no, literally, we answer the phone.
They answer the phone.
You will be talking to the portfolio manager.
That is big time. I'm grateful for you.
Same here.
Thank you.
Always love being on with you.
Thank you. Judah, that's a wrap. For Alex, Judah, I'm Jerry, and this is the I Love CVille Show. Tomorrow, 10:15 a.m., Scott Morris, Keith Smith, myself, and Carrie Griggs. Get ready, guys. Have a good afternoon. Take care. Bravo.
Oh, thank you, Jerry.